Hello people, welcome back to Story Crime and Wine. Today is going to be a longer video. I personally use these kinds of videos on YouTube for chores, for commutes, and for trying to sleep. I hope that this aids you in whatever it is you are about to do. If you like what you hear today, go ahead and subscribe. It would also be very helpful if you hit the like button. If you like it, of course. And hit the bell because you never know when a post will strike when you need it most. Grab a glass of wine or water or whatever you need, and let's get started. I want to start off by saying this isn't my story. It's a messed up story from when my older cousin Dylan was a kid and he told me about it recently. I'm telling it from his point of view. I think everyone has memories from our childhood that bother us. I'm 24 years old now, but this is something I'll never forget. When I was in elementary school, I did what was called the extended day program, which was just daycare after school for kids whose parents worked late or just for kids whose parents needed a place for them to make friends. This happened to me when I was in second grade, and I was 7 years old at the time. My parents worked late on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and my older sister Alyssa had a part-time job at McDonald's at the time. Usually my parents would pick me up, but on Tuesdays and Thursdays, my sister picked me up at around 4:30, about an hour and a half after school ended. I still vividly remember a lot of details about when this happened. It was a chilly but not cold day in March, and we were on a playground running around. It was about 4:10 when the teacher that was watching us on the playground, Mr. McCann, told me that I was going home. Mr. McCann walked with me back into the school where I grabbed my backpack and walked out in the lobby. There, I met a young woman, no older than 30. She looked huge to me at my age, but in reality, she was probably about 5'2". She was skinny and she had long, dark brown hair with tan skin, a pointy nose, a ton of makeup, and a tattoo on her left arm. That's about the best description I can give. She bent down and asked if I was Dylan, and I, stupidly, said yes. She introduced herself as Heather and said she worked with Alyssa, and that since Alyssa had to work extra late, she told her to pick me up. And a little side note, she never mentioned Alyssa by name, she just said, "I work with your sister." That'll be important later. Anyway, she grabbed my hand and we walked to her car together, and obviously I didn't think anything of it, because I was so young and innocent. When we got to her car, Heather offered me M&Ms. Again, another red flag, but my naive self thought she was being nice, so I ate them. I know what most of you are probably thinking, but luckily they turned out not to be drugged. At first, nothing seemed off. Heather took me the same way my parents and my sister always took me to and from school. It wasn't until she passed by my street that I started to realize something was off. I told her that we passed by my street, but she just responded by saying, "Okay," and kept going down the main road. It wasn't in the caring, friendly tone that she had when I met her less than 30 minutes before. She seemed cold now, and didn't really care about how nervous I was. I asked her if she could get me a Happy Meal, and she responded by yelling at me, "Shut up, kid!" A couple of minutes of silence passed as she continued driving until I asked her if her and Alyssa are friends. Her response? "Who's Alyssa?" Who's Alyssa? The two words that made my heart, lungs, and every other organ in my body drop to the pit of my stomach. Even as a kid, I knew this meant she didn't know me. I started crying, afraid of what was going to happen next. Heather kept screaming for me to shut up and even reached over and slapped me a couple times. Eventually, she got so fed up with me that she pulled over, put the car in park, and pulled a roll of duct tape out of the center console. Then, just like in an action movie, a police car pulled up behind us. This made Heather drop the duct tape. She then proceeded to put the car back in drive and floor it down the road. We were on a 30-mile-per-hour road, but she had to be going at least 60, maybe 70. This lasted for about 5 minutes, and I kept crying as Heather floored it down the road and threw turns at ridiculous speeds. Eventually, we came up on 2 police cars blocking the road, which made Heather slam on the brakes, sliding to a stop just before she hit the police cars. She got out and started running, but luckily the cops were quick enough, and they were able to stop her before she ran into the woods that were along the road. And that was that. As Heather was taken to one of the police cars, one of the police officers took me home in his car, doing his best to comfort me. When I got home, Alyssa was sobbing as she hugged me for about 2 minutes straight, and my parents both got home not long after. They were also really upset. That night, they had a very long talk with me about stranger danger, and the police came to check on us and ask me more questions. It turned out Heather wasn't her real name, and that she had no connection to my sister like she had said. And even though I had no idea at the time, her boyfriend was a suspected child trafficker who was later found guilty. Looking back on it now and knowing that makes me feel even more lucky. What still really confuses me is how Heather, or whatever her name is, knew who I was. Keep in mind that I was only 7, and this was before cell phones and social media were big. I do have one theory though. Mr. McCann, the teacher that ran the after-school program, was fired after the incident. And I saw on the news many years later that he was charged with touching a kid at another school, and he killed himself the day before he was supposed to go to trial. I think there's a chance that maybe him and Heather were related, or at least knew each other somehow, but I'll probably never know for sure if my story and Mr. McCann are connected. Kids, be very careful with adults, and always listen to your parents when they warn you about the dangers of the world. Parents, please, for the love of God, teach your kids about stranger danger and not to get in cars, that kind of thing. Luckily, the school handled it pretty well, but I want to remind schools to be vigilant about taking care of kids, especially young ones. Hopefully, Heather is either in jail or got some kind of help, and she'll never try to harm a child again. When I was about 24, I was always busy with work and I lived in a small historic town. So, needless to say, I didn't get out much. Which is why I was so excited when my 30-something cousin came up from Fresno to visit. I was also excited when she wanted to go check out the scene on the first night that she stayed with me. As it turns out, she was a drinker, so we headed out to hit up a few small bars in my town. We only ended up finding one bar that was kind of happening. It had a pool table, plus it allowed smoking inside, so we were sold. I decided to sit at the bar, and my cousin headed off to play pool with some guys. As I'm sitting at the bar sipping my drink and checking my phone, I get a tap on my shoulder. I turn to see an older gentleman, whom I didn't recognize right away. Seeing my puzzled look, he exclaims, "It's me, Cody's dad." I then instantly realized that he is the father of a boy I had dated in the 8th grade when I was about 14. His dad seemed nice enough, but I did remember that he was a pretty stern character back then. Sometimes as a punishment for his son, he would have him dig trenches even in the summertime, in the hard-pan rocky ground. I could even remember hanging out at his house back in the day, and just getting a bad feeling about his dad. Though I never experienced anything around his dad that would justify that feeling. So of course, I was surprised he even recognized me at all those years later. He bought me a drink and we started catching up a little. As we're talking, my cousin comes over to check in with me, upon seeing a much older man at the bar speaking with me. Eventually, he suggested that we go outside to smoke, since the bar was getting pretty smoky. Once we were outside, though, I realized we were pretty much alone. This was fine, I figured, since he was always one of my distant neighbors I had known off and on over the years. But I began to understand that I figured wrong, as he started asking me more personal questions. He started asking me about whether or not I had a boyfriend, or if I'd ever consider dating an older guy. I started getting uncomfortable, so I suggested that we go back in, where it was a bit warmer. But again, after a few minutes, he wanted to go back outside. At that point, though, I was already trying to blow him off politely. My cousin was seeing all this, since she was walking over again to check in with me. She gave me a sort of warning look before turning and walking back to her game of pool. As the night progressed, he continued to try and get me to go outside with him. This time, though, he wanted to go to his truck. Finally, he grabbed my arm and just tried pulling me outside with him. Thank God for my cousin. She seemed to materialize out of nowhere, and she grabbed my other arm yelling, "Screw off!" to him. He immediately backed right off and disappeared into the small crowd toward the back exit. For the rest of that night, we enjoyed ourselves and had some much-needed fun. It wasn't until about 6 months later that I heard a horrifying story about him from another neighbor. I was told that he was in prison, probably for life. Apparently, he had been stalking and watching his soon-to-be ex-wife at their former home for months. Eventually, he had decided to straight up kidnap her, tying her up and gagging her. He then put her in his truck or back seat and drove her down towards Mexico. In Los Angeles, California, he decided they should stop for the night, as it was about an 8-hour drive from our hometown. All night on that stay, he repeatedly SA'd her, beat and tortured her. He had apparently told her that he was taking her to Mexico to kill her. He had been treating her that way for years. I knew upon hearing that my bad feeling as a kid was justified. I'm now getting chills just writing this part. Somehow, though, she managed to escape his brutal attack that night. He was arrested pretty quick after that. So Ken, who tried to get me alone outside the bar that night to do who knows what, let's not ever, ever meet again. I just went into the murder-suicide house on my street. Nothing had been touched since the bodies were removed nearly a year ago. Not even the mattress where the bodies sat decomposing for 6 weeks. Most of the neighbors on our street are friendly. We look out for each other, we text, chat, and say hello when we see one another, etc. It's a sweet feeling of community. In the past, there had only been one household that wasn't interested in being friendly with any of us. An elderly woman, mid-70s, we'll call her Maud, and her son, mid-50s, we'll call him Don. We'd, my partner and I, attempt to wave and say hello, only to be met with cold stares. Once, my dog managed to slip out of his collar and run through their yard while Maud was out getting the mail. The glare I received from her while trying to catch the dog left me with a feeling hard to shake. You know that unexpected gut punch feeling when you become the object of a stranger's misery and hatred? Anyways, we learned quickly to stay out of her way. We barely ever saw Dawn. The blinds were always closed tight. They rarely left the house, and no one ever visited. I last saw either of them at the beginning of August in 2021. Dawn was getting the mail while wearing blue latex gloves. I thought it was weird. In early October, one of our other neighbors reached out to ask if we had seen Maud or Dawn recently. We had not. Suddenly, we were all too aware that their grass was over 3 feet tall, and the mailbox was so full it couldn't close anymore, and papers were spilling out into the street. Obviously, a welfare check was called. The neighbor who had put herself in charge of directly communicating with the police called shortly after the check and told us to sit down. Maud and Dawn were both dead, and had been dead for 6 to 8 weeks. It appeared to be a murder-suicide, the assumption being that he killed her. I paced the rest of the day in front of my living room windows, watching the crime scene van pull up, the officers in and out of the front door, taking breaks to somberly chat in the front yard. And then after a few hours, out came the body bags. The smell was something I had never experienced before and will never forget. The following weeks, I thought of how many times I had walked by that house with my son and dog while 2 bodies had sat rotting. I stayed up for hours a few nights trying to find out anything I could. Nothing. No news stories, crime reports, nothing. So I dug into Maud's history. All I could find was that she had been buried in a field north of town dedicated to the unclaimed. I kept a close watch on the house and researched the legal proceedings it would go through since there was no kin. Looking at that house had always felt cold and sad before, but now it felt dark too. Haunted. I became obsessed with Maud's story, with no way of getting answers. Her house just staring back at me blankly every single day. Back in the spring, my young son and I were out catching fireflies. We would stand still, waiting for one to blink, and run in that direction. It took us up and down the street multiple times. I know this is such a small, silly detail, but that night I stared into Maud's yard for minutes at a time, waiting to see a firefly, and I swear not a single firefly blinked over there. I became so bothered by it that I stared longer, sure that if I just stared long enough I would see one, but nothing. complete stillness and darkness. I told my husband that I hoped someone would buy the property and knock the house down. No one had any business living there now. Today, around a year after they died, the doors were opened and people I hadn't seen before were in and out, carrying bag after bag of what looked like junk. I texted a neighbor and asked for intel. He said the house and all of its belongings had been collectively sold and bought at an auction 2 weeks ago. These were the new owners, probably getting ready to flip the house. I typically don't shove myself into situations, but I had just spent way too much time thinking about Maud, wondering who she was, why she was so angry, imagining what strange life her and her son had been living, and what their last moments were like. I knew I'd regret it forever if I didn't ask them what it was like inside. So I did, and they invited me in. One step into the front door and more puzzle pieces fell into place. This was a hoarder home. There was barely anywhere to put my feet. Stacks on stacks of old fine china, pots and pans, vintage books and records, knickknacks, and countless boxes filled with who knows what from the floor to the ceiling. The woman who had led me inside said, "The mattress where it happened is still here. Do you want to see it?" Slightly afraid that she'd think I was completely demented, but far more curious, I said that of course I wanted to see it. She led me to a bedroom through piles and leaning stacks of junk. She walked into a cramped small bedroom with a twin-sized bed and pulled the blanket back. If you've seen what decomposition stains look like, then you can imagine what I saw. After processing, I asked, "So this is where Maud was found?" "I think they were both in here. I'm trying to piece it all together. I haven't even started in the other corner bedroom, but I'm hoping it'll give me some answers. I'll be here organizing and sorting over the next few days. You're welcome to join me if you'd like." I told her that I would love nothing more. So after all of these months, I am excited to have a chance to get some answers to everything I've been wondering, to get a sense of who Maud was, to possibly find a way to honor what seemed to have been a very sad life, to maybe get some clues into why her son murdered her. Her son, who, I found out shortly after seeing the house, was a deeply troubled sex offender who was charged by the FBI for child images and soliciting a minor in 2014, and to hopefully do it without any bad energy attaching itself to me. I do keep wondering, why, if this was a murder-suicide, did the police not do a deeper investigation? Is it because there were no kin to care? Does anyone have insight? I was in my living room watching TV. It was midnight when I decided to go to sleep. I turned off the TV and started walking toward an open door to the balcony where my cat was. I had to get him inside and close the door, but as soon as I reached the door, I saw a black figure just standing outside on the street. My heart started beating fast and I was shaking. I just had that uneasy feeling that this is not normal and I'm in danger. The figure didn't move. I could tell it's a man, but I couldn't see his face. I was just staring at him for probably 3 or 4 seconds before he started to walk. He was moving down the street towards me. He was walking really slowly, and he was turning around, looking all around himself. Walked a bit forward, then backwards. He didn't look drunk. That was the scary part. I went full panic mode. I grabbed my cat and closed the door. I put my cat in the hallway where in my head he was safe. I stayed in the living room, still looking out the balcony door, but I was hiding behind a wall. I saw the man walk very slowly past my house, and he was walking backwards. He was looking all around himself, but I saw he was gazing at me as well. He was bald and wearing a blue t-shirt. I have never seen him before, which is kind of strange because I live in a small town where you know pretty much everyone. When he passed my house, I ran to my room, which is a floor higher than the living room. I looked out the window and I saw him back where he was stood the first time I saw him. He was walking in the opposite direction. I was watching him and he stopped at some residential blocks. I thought he lived there. There are a lot of new people living there, so I don't know all of them. Some people that live there come out at night to smoke. I thought he was one of them, but I was wrong. He didn't enter. He was just looking at the entrance. He took out his phone and turned on his flashlight to see better, and then he left. This whole thing made me think about another creepy thing that happened not long ago. It was nighttime, and I was watching TV. The door to the hallway was open. Right outside are some stairs, and there is a front door to our house. All of a sudden, I heard someone trying to open the front door very aggressively. My heart stopped. My whole family was asleep, but I brushed it off as my neighbor coming home drunk and mistaking our door with his, since our houses are right next to each other. He comes home drunk very often, so this isn't impossible, but the man I saw tonight makes me question everything. Every night when I'm laying in my bed, I hear someone walk very slowly down my street, but I had never bothered to look who it was, because I didn't know this man existed yet. And I know people take night walks, and honestly, that's why I never bothered to look outside to check who was walking before. But this man, there's just something off about him. Seeing him just stand there in the middle of the street looking at nothing, and then walking backwards and looking everywhere, just makes my skin crawl. My mind is coming up with all sorts of explanations, like he's a burglar, just eyeing the houses he's going to rob next, or he's a murderer, looking for his next victims. But I know I'm not supposed to judge that quick. I'm just really scared. I've always been scared of thunderstorms ever since my parents brought me to a reenactment of one of the worst tornadoes in the world when I was young. I always thought that a thunderstorm would have a big tornado ever since, so I'm lucky that I live in an area that never gets hit by big thunderstorms. One day, me and my brother got my dad to bring us to the movies to watch the new World War Z movie. Before we left, the sky was very dark, darker than I had ever seen, but I was too excited to pay any more attention to it. I thought the movie was scary and my heart was racing. It happened during the plane crash near the end of the movie. I was sunk down in my seat, a scared little kid, when the screen and the lights all went out. My heart sank, and for a second, I thought it was just the projector messing up, but then the staff came in. We were told that we had just lost power, and we should take shelter in the main entrance. I guess the movie was so loud none of us heard it, but when we all entered the lobby, we could only see a gray blanket of rain. Every few seconds, a big flash would light up only a few feet ahead of us. There was so much wind that anything still outside was at an angle. That was one of the very few times I've heard the wind howl that loud. My brother and father are not as scared of storms as I am, which for some reason made me even more scared because I felt a little bit crazy for being the only one this worried. I probably thought they didn't know what could happen in a storm this big. I was shaking a bit when my dad suggested running out to grab the car and pick us up at the entrance. That snapped me out of my trance a bit, and he was already heading out for the car. I stood there for what felt like forever, just waiting to see the headlights of our car with my brother. I never got a good look at his face to see what he was doing or feeling, but I think he was more calm than me because I never heard a noise from him. After seeing person after person go for their car and others driving by, I saw our car. We both ran for the car and rain pelted us. We were drenched and soaked by the time we made it to the car, even though it was just a few steps away. My dad asked if we were okay, and we said yes, but nothing else, I think. By that time, I was just trying to calm down and tune things out. The drive home wasn't great either. During the drive, I guess my brother thought it would be funny to mess with me. He every so often started to taunt me, saying things like, "Hey, look outside, it's not that bad. Why are you so scared?" While rolling down my window, letting me get wet, scaring the crap out of me more. Eventually, my dad told my brother to stop and leave me alone. I did look outside every so often to see pools of water, cars with all their lights on so we could see them, trees and power lines shaking in the wind. Some of the cars kicked up big waves as they drove past. I eventually stopped looking and just looked at my feet, trying to tune out the noise. All I could hear was rain pelting our car and the windshield wipers moving as fast as they could. I'm not exactly sure why, but I think it was a tornado warning or just that it was getting really bad, but eventually we had stopped at some side roads. My mom was also out at this time, and we didn't know if she got home in time. I didn't listen to much of the call, but she saw the storm coming and decided to head home early from what she was doing. There was so much rain that even if I wanted to hear more of the call, it would be impossible. My dad and brother had a calm conversation while I just sat there with my head down. Maybe it's because I was younger and can't remember it that well, but it didn't feel like we were there for that long. But eventually, my dad started to drive again. When we got home, 25 minutes had passed from what is usually a 10-minute drive. The storm was clearing up, and we saw that our street got hit hard. Big branches and sticks were the least of it. Our neighbors have 3 giant trees in the front yard, and one fell and completely blocked the road. All of the adults gathered to talk while I headed inside, but on the way in, I saw a truck that I guess just needed to get home, and instead of taking one of the other ways out of our street, they drove on the grass, kicking up a lot of dirt. One of our neighbors used a chainsaw to cut it, and their car to move a bit of it so cars could pass. I was already inside in bed, scared and crying, holding my stuffed animals, thanking whatever kept us from getting stuck or a tornado hitting us. This happened to me a couple of hours ago. Sorry for bad English, not a native speaker. I was going to my friend's house, coming back from partying in a club with some friends. I had decided to go alone since I got bored, and since I had left my car at her house, I must go to her house to pick it up and drive it back home. I'm going, and so far, nothing weird is happening. I must note that I live in a small city and that here are many small streets that are poorly lit and perfect for stalking. I'm going, and I notice 2 homeless-looking guys start going behind me around 10 meters back. First, I think nothing of it. Then I turn right, and they followed. I'm like, okay, it's just a coincidence. They probably noticed me turning around quite a lot, but they were silent, as they weren't speaking. They are walking together, but not talking at all. Just 2 very tall, bearded guys behind me. I'm getting very suspicious of them, and make very weird patterns of turning right and left, just to make sure, and they still followed, and still didn't speak a word. I was already near my friend's house, and I sensed that the clock is ticking inside me, and I just started running. She was alone at home because she did not want to go party, and I just sprint in and ask her for a knife. She looks at me like I was crazy, and asks me why I need a knife. I come to the window and see them stand for 10 seconds, staring at the window. I take the knife and come out, but they were already gone. I didn't call the police, since in my country, police are always lazy, and they get nothing done. I'm fairly sure I dodged the bullet by sprinting at the last second, since they were already closing in on me with their fast walk. So this happened to me and my little brother. We'll name him Dylan for confidentiality purposes, when we lived together a few years back. I was a 25-year-old male and my little brother was 19. We were relaxing, playing some Halo 3 on the Xbox, smoking a bowl, just being brothers hanging out on our usual daily days off from work. It was a Saturday night in the midsummer of 2009. We lived in a quiet neighborhood. Neighbors were just far enough apart you had privacy, but they never got into your business. We all knew each other as our parents lived in the house for years, and it was our childhood home. When my parents retired, they moved off and left the house to us, so we never had to worry about a roof over our head. Now, our house is at the end of the cul-de-sac with a garage door to the right, and our front door is up 4 steps to the left of the window between our garage door, but from our kitchen, you can see straight out when the curtains are open. This particular night would grow to haunt me and my brother to this day. After a few hardcore hours of gaming, it's like 3 a.m, my brother would need to get up and stretch his legs and relax his hands. He went down the stairs to grab some water and a snack, when suddenly, Dylan comes running up the stairs and locks the door, completely freaking out. I look at him confused, barking, "Bro, what is wrong?" With a pale ghost white face, he looks at me and says, "There is a guy on the porch with his hands cupped to the window, smiling from ear to ear." Then we hear 5 knocks at the door. We froze in our tracks, backing slowly away from the door. I get under my bed and grab the machete and bat I keep under my bed in case I ever needed to defend myself. I watch many zombie movies. I give the bat to Dylan, as he's taller than me and has longer arms, and it would be more beneficial to him. We tiptoe back to the bedroom door and unlock it. We crack the door open just enough to see out of. Then suddenly, the man knocks over and over and over, and before you know it, it just stopped. I told Dylan to grab my cell phone and dial 911. He did, and dispatch sent officers our way immediately. While on the phone, the man went around the back of the house, and we heard screaming coming from the backyard. The man was there, just looking at the bedroom window with that creepy smile. We stayed just out of the line of sight, peeking from the corners. Suddenly, the man takes off in a full-on sprint and threw himself into our back door. We holler, "Oh crap, he's trying to break in our back door," to the dispatch officer. She tells units to step it up as he's trying to make entry. We hear the sirens closing in faster and faster as the man continues to bash himself into our door. On the third bash, we hear the door crash open. We stay as quiet as possible, listening to things in the kitchen being smashed to hell and the man yelling, come out, wherever you are." I whisper to dispatch that he's downstairs in the kitchen, and she tells officers he's made entry, and one unit said he was close. We ready our bat and machete as we hear footsteps creaking up the stairs. Then, blue lights can be seen illuminating the house as we hear, "Police, come out with your hands up. Make your presence known." The man books it down the stairs and gets tackled by officers and handcuffed after a bit of a struggle. We came out when the officers cleared the house and made sure it was safe. The man was high on M, just looking to rob us to get another fix. We're so thankful for the officer that arrived when he did. We thanked him until the moment he left. He still came by from time to check on us and even played video games with us a few times. We still get nightmares of that creepy smile. And to whomever you are, creepy smiley man, I hope we never meet again. One day, me and my friend wanted to go exploring around the surrounding parts of my neighborhood. We lived in a suburban town in western Pennsylvania, and nothing really bad happens around here. I was about 16 at the time of this event, and I remember it vividly. So, on this day, we heard about an abandoned house right across the highway that has been deserted for years. Being young and adventurous at the time, my friend and I were excited to check out this place. We rode our bikes to where the house was located. The house was semi-covered by overgrown trees and vines, and the house was an eerie gray color. We parked our bikes behind the house to where the backyard was so we wouldn't be seen by any neighbors. This house was surrounded by 4 other houses that were being lived in. The back door was cracked open already, so we didn't have to break anything open to get inside. Right as we walked through the back door, we were welcomed to the kitchen, which was destroyed by water damage and mold. Luckily, we brought masks and gloves to protect us from the smell and everything we touch in this home. Miscellaneous items were scattered everywhere across the floor and down the hall, which leads to the front door. This house is a 2-story house with an unfinished basement that looks like it was built in the mid-1900s. One thing I noticed when we walked through the first floor was that lots of the furniture and decor were still present in the house, which was odd. It seems like whoever lived here has completely left everything the way it used to be, other than probably a few things, because the interior of the house was still decently bare. We found an old record player, a few old video game consoles, and those massive joysticks you use, and lots of old books. These were the items we found just scattered across the first floor hallway. We haven't even went upstairs yet. There was a narrow wood staircase that leads up to the second floor. When walking up it, the silence was broken by the overwhelming sound of the creaking of the stairs. At the top, there are 2 rooms on either side of the stairs, each almost identical and symmetrical to the other. My friend and I decide to enter the left room first to see what's inside. The first thing I see when entering was a massive black piano in the middle of the floor. I was not sure why there was a piano upstairs and not on the first floor, but it was cool. Ominous to see, though. The thick carpet the piano sat on was a dark red color. Everything in this room was scattered across the floor as well. Most of the items were kids' toys and magazines, so I assumed that a family used to live here. Also, The one window that faces the backyard where we left our bikes was open when we walked in. This was odd but not surprising. The entire time here, I just had a gut feeling that we weren't alone, even though we have at least glanced into every room, and this house has been for sale since 2006. It was 2017 at the time. This is where things escalated almost immediately. My friend was searching through the bookshelves across the room while I was looking at the piano. I wanted to lighten things up, since we both felt slightly uneasy being here due to the state of the house it was in. So I wanted to play a tune on the piano. I play a few notes to some random song that I don't remember, but I was interrupted by a loud crash coming from downstairs. It sounded like something from the basement, which the staircase to it was right below the staircase to the second floor, if you can picture what I mean by that. We both stood silently looking at each other in disbelief until moments later, we hear loud stomping running down the hallway on the first floor, coming toward the second floor staircase. Whatever this was sounded like it had big boots on, and the whole house shook after each foot smashed into the floor as it ran through the hallway. There was no voice or screaming coming from whatever this was. It was just running after us. We hear it continue to run at full speed through the house and up the creaky stairs. My friend and I were freaking out and had to make a decision fast. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't stopping at all on its way up to us. We remembered that this window next to us was open, so our only solution to getting out safely was to jump out the window. From the moment I started playing the piano to when we jumped out the window after hearing someone chasing us happened within mere seconds. Luckily, our bikes were right below where we jumped out, and all I could think about was getting out and across the highway as fast as possible. I got slightly hurt after jumping out the second-story window, but my adrenaline was through the roof, and I wasn't thinking about it in that moment. My friend was right behind me the whole time, thankfully, and we both got on our bikes and left. I was shook to tears the whole ride back home. To this day, I still have no idea what was in that house that chased us. We never heard the back or front door open, and everything in this house creaks, so we would have heard it. This was in the house the entire time we were there, and I don't know how we didn't see anything. I have a great feeling that this wasn't human, but who knows? I will never forget this day, ever. To give a little context, I was 15 at the time and was down at a family friend's house. I had a long-distance relationship at the time with a girl from Georgia, which will come into play later. So, it was dark out, and I was just hanging out in the living room with the younger boys playing Mortal Kombat when I get a call from Atlanta. I normally don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize because they always seem to be scams, and I had just gotten this number a year before that and would get calls like them all the time. But thinking it was her, I answered it. Hello? With nothing coming from the other end but what sounded like loud breathing, I took the phone off my ear, thinking something was off with my phone. There was a lot of background noise from my parents' conversations, and at the time, one of the moms was talking, and right then I hear, "Glad to hear that tramp is still with you. I'm on my way," and hangs up. I said, "What the heck?" out loud. I shrugged it off and thought, not my problem. I texted my girlfriend and said, "Was that one of your friends?" She had no idea what I was talking about. And right then, I get a text from the number. It reads, "I'm glad to hear that nasty tramp in the background." And then he follows up with, "On my way." I said, "Bro, I think you got the wrong number." Honestly, just thinking it was my girlfriend playing a trick on me. And he said, "Have you lost your mind? Say that when we pull up." I'm done talking. I said, "Dude, it says you're in Atlanta. I'm 24 hours away from there," which is the truth. I do live that far away. He just said, "Plan your escape route now." At this point in time, I'm thinking this guy must have a girlfriend that is screwing around with whoever this number used to belong to, and I just wanted him to leave me alone because I'm not the guy. So I was trying to convince him. I said, "You got the wrong guy. I'm telling you. How do you even get my number?" He said, or this is how I took it, his grammar was not very good, "Trailers take minutes to burn down after being fully in flames. Old houses take 8. then followed by a "shut up." Responding to my message, I said, "I don't live in a trailer." He said, "I'm done talking. I'm on my way." Now this was the stupid part on my end, but I just wanted him to leave me alone, and the chances of this guy coming all the way out here where I lived were slim. Plus, we lived in a very rural area and would know instantly if there was a car by our house we didn't recognize. I responded with, "I'm 15, dude." He just put a laughing emoji. I then said, "You literally have the wrong guy." This was the part that made my stomach sink, and still does to this day. I honestly felt like I was gonna throw up the first time I read it. He said, "She's dead," and then sent a picture. The picture was of what looked like a woman's feet, covered in tattoos and white nail polish in a very unnatural position. This was enough for me to lose it and tell this dude to leave me alone. So I said, "Nah, dude, you got the wrong guy." He said, "IP address says different, so shut up," followed by, "See you shortly." My heart sank into my chest, thinking this guy would actually be crazy enough to pull my IP after possibly murdering a woman. I had enough. I said, "I'm blocking your number. I don't know how you got it, but you got the wrong number." And being a dumb 15-year-old, tried to play it off so that the guy wouldn't actually come to my house. The rest of my text read, "I don't got no women or anything. Whoever you're after, it ain't me." I immediately blocked the number and texted my friends about it. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't think they could really do anything with what little information I had. And plus, I didn't want to tell my parents because I made the mistake of telling the guy my age. To this day, I still don't know if it was real or not, and why it was my number he contacted. It doesn't even look close to the same area code he was in. I had completely forgotten about this story. It was like I put up a mental block in my brain just trying to forget about it, until I was listening to a true text message horror story on YouTube with my friend, shout out to Mr. Nightmare, and wanted to share my story. I have lived with a condition called narcolepsy since I was 13. An extra little gift from the condition is onset sleep paralysis, or more specifically, hypnagogic hallucinations, meaning it's normal while falling asleep to get stuck. On occasion, I have the sensation while falling asleep that I'm submerging deeper and deeper underwater. Eventually, when I get deep enough, I'll fall asleep. It's the way down that's weird. The deeper I go, the longer it takes to snap out of. I can feel my body, but I cannot move my body. This is where it gets weird. I'll be falling asleep and begin to feel something moving my blankets, touching my face, and more dramatically, I'll be outright assaulted, grabbed, choked, violated. Not asleep, but not awake either. Night terrors are another product of narcolepsy. I don't experience them very often, but when I do, they can be traumatic. I still remember night terrors I've had regardless of how long it's been. Dreams of being held captive with family members and them watching as I am being flayed alive. Escaping and hiding while the buildings around me are being bombed with screams of the wounded. A woman, her legs crushed beneath fallen debris, in shock. She begged me to take her daughters with me to safety while still holding the hand of a child beneath the wreckage. Both of these experiences have a strange residual effect. I'll snap out of it or wake up and still feel whatever the hell was going on. My skin tingling or outright sore with no visible injury from whatever was happening. Like anything that can't be changed or helped, eventually, I got used to it. There's a recognizable feel or intuition to what's happening, making it more easily recognizable and shrug off whatever messed up thing I just experienced. So here's the incident. When I was 17, I went over to my uncle's to visit my newborn cousin. Right away, I could tell that there is something that was bothering him. Shortly, he opened up about what was happening, saying, "Adam, there's something weird going on in this house. Light bulbs being thrown down the stairs and missing from their sockets, running up and down the stairs, along with heavy footsteps from around the house, doors slamming." Coming from a family having had many spooky situations, we've been raised to pay attention to how a house makes you feel, against reason, and to be skeptical and distant despite reason when you do. That being said, the next thing my uncle asked was, "Go check it out." He's made himself a cool little man cave in the basement, and I went and sat on the couch looking around. All was good, nothing felt weird about it. until I got transfixed on this purple painting on the wall. It was perpendicular on the wall to a Muhammad Ali picture, and the reflection of Ali off the painting looked weird. I stared at it a while and got a huge chill up my spine. Trying to make my eyes focus, I thought I was looking at the face of a balding, heavy-set white man. Now, I'm a bit bugged out and went upstairs and said that, yeah, it's creepy. Having school the next morning, I had planned to stay over. When I head to bed in the spare room, it took me a bit to settle and relax. It wasn't long till I'm slipping away, but it was different. Totally aware of my body, I'm in this full-on lucid dream. I saw that I was standing outside the house and staring at the brick wall to the outside of the room I was resting, then slowly and strangely moving closer and closer to the house. I had this sensation that I feel like I wasn't at the wheel here. Unblinkingly and slowly moving toward the house, I couldn't snap out of it, but until I was so close to the wall I nearly walked into it. Coming to, with a harrowing chill up my spine, shake it off, relax, and try again. So, I rolled over with the blanket over my shoulders and moving my mind to soothing thoughts. I tried this and ended up getting frustrated not being able to focus. I rolled over onto my back after several minutes of trying to relax. Then, I felt this huge weight sit down on my chest. But this was different. I wasn't asleep. I'm kicking my legs, trying to move my arms that are pinned on either side of my head. Sunken deeply into the mattress, I can feel this excess weight sink me deeper into the mattress. I couldn't breathe. Coughing and gasping, this lasted felt like forever, probably 5 seconds. I was able to lift my head slightly and watched the blanket being pulled off of me. Pause right here for a sec. Honestly, at this point, I think, move, struggling like I'm awake, but my own screams couldn't come out. They were like this loud echo inside my head. Once it stopped, I rolled onto the floor and got to the wall where I had to catch my breath before I could call for help. When my uncle came in, and what sticks with me is that when I could see with the light on, the blankets were in this very neat pile at the foot of the bed. The only way I could have accomplished this is by standing on the bed, hold the blanket spread out, and slowly drop it into a neat pile on the floor. Conclusion: I still rack my mind around that night. I haven't had an episode like that before or since, as I described previously. My uncle since has had a daughter and spent many years in that house. The weird stuff never stopped. My uncle catching his son at 3 talking to himself staring at the ceiling, and when asked who he was talking to said, "Mr. Nobody." He was asked what Mr. Nobody looks like. He has a big black face with red eyes. I was asked to babysit when they were 4 and 2. At 3 p.m., as soon as they left, I had one cousin bawling at the door and the other trying to convince me that there were footprints and trying to lead me into the basement. Hell no. Close that door. Everything went fine until about 1 a.m., after they both fell asleep. My adrenaline kicking in hard when I could hear wheezing or difficult breathing. I immediately checked them both and they were fine. Sat down on the couch and started hearing it again. I matched my breath to it. Full adult breath. No, this is not my first time babysitting. I can't afford and refuse to get spooked or messed with. So I turned up the TV and ended up falling asleep a while later. I woke up at about 3:30 a.m. and the oldest was standing in front of the TV. I called him and he wouldn't respond. I kept calling until I got to him and touched him on the shoulder. Poor guy's face melted and he just bawled, confused and scared. Needless to say, he slept on the couch with me. They moved out about a year after this, and to this day, both kids can recall who Mr. Nobody was, and neither have sleepwalked since. Despite trying to discredit myself, knowing that I have a predisposition for nocturnal hallucinations, I reluctantly believe what I experienced wasn't that, and that many other strange experiences after, I may not be tripping out, that those violations are of a supernatural nature, and nothing can be done about it. What are your thoughts? There is a timestamp below on where this story truly gets scary. The first part is necessary background information. This story is quite long, but it will all make sense in the end. I was born in Fort Lewis, Washington in February of 1980. My father was in the U.S. Army, so we moved to Fort Huachuca, Arizona when I was about a year and a half old. After about a year, my father transferred back to Fort Lewis and finished his career there until about September 1983. After his time in service ended, we moved to Montana, where both my parents were born and raised. They grew up in small towns, my father's being one of the smallest, with a population of about 120 people. We moved there first and lived there for about 2 years before relocating to another larger town. I was the only boy in the family, with 2 half-sisters from my mother's previous abusive marriage and 2 full-blood sisters, one younger than I, so you can imagine the torture I had to endure growing up. But that's irrelevant to my story. My parents were always trying to pursue better career opportunities, which was the reason for us moving around from a couple different towns. When I was in 2nd grade, our school was next to the junior high school. So the playground was next to the track field that the junior high students would hang out at. After lunch, we were outside during our extended recess, and I was playing on one of the balance beams, which was sitting on stiff springs, to make balancing a bit more of a challenge. I looked across and noticed one of the female junior high students walking towards me, fairly fast, and fairly aggressive. I didn't think anything of it because I was too busy playing. Without saying a word, she kicked me in the groin twice, and so hard that it lifted me off the beam and I collapsed in agony. I started crying. She then kicked me in the stomach while I was down, and the playground monitors came up to her and demanded to know why she did that. She responded with, "I don't like him." They asked if she knew me, or what I had done to make her do that to me. In a disgusted voice, she snapped, "Just look at him. He's stupid." The playground monitors demanded that she leave immediately, and they called the junior high school. I never heard anything since, so I'm not sure if the girl received any kind of disciplinary action. I noticed that as each school year passed, I was considered the ugly boy, who girls always said, "Ew," as I passed, including the girls who weren't much to look at either, and sometimes would even push me, then try to pass my germs onto each other in disgust. I never bothered them, but this kind of treatment, or bullying, if you prefer to call it, became a normal routine. It started with girls and then moved up to boys. Bus rides were even worse. I would drive home with bruises from the boys and scratch marks and sore head from hair pulling from the girls. I guess going through this put me in a depressed mindset, which changed my behavior and made me even less pleasant to be around. I started walking with a hunch and never felt very good about myself. Eventually, my grades started declining because I started daydreaming about being at home and playing because it was the only time I felt happiness anymore. School was miserable, and I ended up getting held back and had to repeat a grade. Sometimes I would try to fit in, but would only get rejected even more, or even physically pushed. My friends were the only ones I was able to look up to, and they actually made me feel good about myself. After I started 5th grade, we relocated again, to Helena, the state capital. I missed my friends terribly and had hoped that I would see them again someday. Helena was the town where we would finally settle. I was relieved to know that I would be away from those other kids who were mean to me and would be able to start fresh again. I was wrong. The bullying seemed to follow me, as though I was haunted, so I remained shy and chose to keep to myself. Through the remainder of 5th grade, it started with girls again, but the boys pretty much left me alone. I mainly dealt with rejection. I would ask girls I was interested in to the school dance, only to be rejected again, and then insulted. My self-esteem was at an all-time low, and my grades were not the greatest, which caused me to be held back a second time, resulting in me repeating the 5th grade again. Here I was, 2 years older than the other kids in my class, lacking any kind of social interaction, which made me feel fairly awkward. So I decided to just accept it and become a loner. Once I started 6th grade, the female rejection continued, but I never had an issue with male students, since I kept to myself and always tried to be nice to everyone who did attempt any kind of interaction. Girls would look at me with disgust while I was passing in the halls. One of them even said "gross" as I walked by. I never talked to any of them, But due to the way I was being treated, I couldn't help but feel that maybe I deserved it, or that it was somehow my fault. I didn't believe I was really ugly, but since all the girls said I was, it must have been true. But I did not deny that I was definitely scrawny. The most popular girl in school was also quite vicious towards me, and the only one among them who was willing to get physical. As I had my locker open, I was getting books out my bag for my next class. Inside the locker below the top shelf was a hook for hanging your coat. After I grabbed the last hook, I felt a hard shove on my back. The top of my head hit the hook, and I started bleeding. I instantly grabbed the top of my head and turned around to see the popular girl standing behind me with her arms folded. I shot her an angry look and asked her why she did that. She mouthed the words, "You're so gross," and stomped off. Luckily, the wound was very mild and had only bled for a few seconds, so I did not need stitching, but remained sore for the rest of the day. Later on that day, a group of boys, the school tough guys, approached me and informed me that Miss Popular had asked them to jump me, but they made it clear that they wouldn't because I was nice and they didn't want to. I thanked them and then headed to my bus. I never understood why girls found me to be so repulsive. I bathed regularly, and I know I didn't stink. I didn't even have acne. Since I chose to keep to myself, I never really had any friends. There was a group of boys who were not exactly angels or the best role models, but they were willing to take me under their wing. Yeah, they were considered a bad crowd, but it felt good to be accepted again. I hung out with them quite often, and eventually started displaying poor behavior. I stole cigarettes from my parents, vandalized mailboxes, snuck out, started getting involved with drugs, etc. Eventually, the trouble all caught up with me and the law got involved. I was 15, almost 16, and since I was a minor, I was put in custody of the state and was sent to Billings, where I stayed with an all-male therapeutic group home. The group home was fairly strict, and you had to earn any kind of privilege, such as video games. The more serious you were about your treatment, the more privileges you earned. Boys that were not willing to dedicate themselves to their treatment or acted like they didn't care were transferred to a more strict facility, and the thought of this terrified me, so I remained focused and dedicated to my treatment. During my free time, I spent time lifting weights and playing video games. Eventually, I started putting on more muscle. It wasn't so much that you would notice at first glance, but enough that you would notice if you truly looked. I wasn't really scrawny anymore, and I actually gained some pectorals. Shortly before I turned 18, the group home staff threw me a party to celebrate my success and stated about how much I had grown and changed since I first got there. I was released 2 days before my 18th birthday and walked out with more pride and confidence than I had ever felt about myself before. My hunch was gone, and I had my confidence back. I said goodbye to everyone, exchanged hugs with some friends, one of whom cried as I was leaving, and then I got in my parents' car and rode 4 hours back home. Getting in trouble was a blessing to me and truly changed my life for the better. I was never very tall. I stopped growing at 16 and I'm only 5'8", but nobody teased me much about my height. After I turned 18, I got a job at McDonald's, but never felt comfortable there because I just didn't feel that it was the job for me. I also noticed something else. Girls were not mistreating me. If anything, I got flirted with a lot. By a lot, I mean a lot. Apparently, many girls from school recognized me and treated me like I was the hottest guy they had ever seen. At this point, due to the way I was always treated, I took it as an attempt to prank me, so I had no problem saying no and walking away. I didn't trust them because their treatment of me left a bad taste in my mouth anyway. Fast forward to January, just before I turned 21, and I had joined the U.S. Army. I was a cannon crew member, and I served in the 101st Airborne Division, 320th Field Artillery. During my time in the Army, women started to throw themselves at me everywhere I went. In the beginning, I loved it. It was a new path in my life, so I knew that whatever was thrown at me was real, and I didn't have to worry about any bullies or pranks. I put on even more muscle and developed quite an athletic build. My PT score was over 300, and even though I didn't look like a bodybuilder, I definitely looked in shape. My veins bulged a bit, and my pectorals were even larger, which made me look sort of funny to others because when I was walking normal, others would comment how I looked like I had a puffed out chest. It was all in good fun, though. Apparently, I got more and more attractive. At first, I ate it up, but later started to get a bit tired of it, where I decided to be more reclusive and frequent the clubs less. Fast forward a couple months. 9/11 attack happened. We eventually went to war in Iraq, and then my time in service was ending and I was sent back stateside for out-processing. I was honorably discharged with 2 Army Commendation Medals, an Army Achievement Medal, Good Conduct Medal, etc. Since my father's health was declining, I decided to go back home instead of re-enlisting. After I got home, I worked odd jobs here and there while finishing my 8-year contract in the reserves. I was still trying to find my place, and a lot of the girls I went to school with noticed me even more than before. The attention was so overwhelming, and I wasn't used to seeing these same girls, who treated me so badly, all of a sudden treated me like I was the hottest man they had ever seen. I started dating again, but never any of the girls I went to school with, and landed a relationship that lasted for 2 years, but we eventually broke up. Fast forward to July 2016, and my father had passed away. Since he was a veteran, he was given a veteran funeral, and I saluted my father as an honorable soldier during the playing of taps and gun salute. My life felt empty, like a huge chunk of me got ripped out, and I eventually put on a little weight, but not much. Over time, I came to terms with his passing and lost the weight I had gained, and was back to having an amazing body, as most women would put it. Fast forward to where I'm in my late 30s, and I got comfortable wearing athletic shirts like skin-tight Under Armour. Not for the appearance, but because I find them to be quite comfortable. I needed to get a new pair of shoes, and I was wearing my tight gray Under Armour shirt. I parked my car and was walking through the parking lot of the shopping district to Famous Footwear, and an old beat-up truck stopped in front of me on the road that runs in between the stores and parking lot. I was about 100 feet away and didn't think much of it until I looked ahead. 2 young girls, who looked like they were still in high school, were in the truck and literally stopped to gawk at me. One of them yelled, "Yow!" like Joan Jett and I Love Rock and Roll. Then the other said, "Can I have your number?" I smiled and I made a statement how, even though I was flattered, I was old enough to be their father. They looked shocked, said, "Sorry," which I then politely waved as they drove away. This sort of attention became super normal to me at this point. Since there was no escape, I decided to just accept and roll with it. Fast forward a couple more years, and now I am 40 years old. It was about 10:30 p.m., and after a long day at work, I decided to stop at one of the corner gas stations in town. I may be in shape, with very little body fat, but I have a bad nicotine habit. I was wearing my black Under Armour shirt, and was waiting in line to get my cigarettes and my favorite drink, Mountain Dew, when this woman, who looked to be between the age of maybe 27 and 30, walked in and was clearly intoxicated. She wasn't ugly, but she wasn't very attractive either. I'm sure that if she was wearing makeup, she would actually look halfway decent. She looked around, then her eyes caught me. She walked, more like stumbled, up to me and then started circling me, slowly, like a vulture. She was leaning back at the hip, as though she had a difficult time keeping her torso balanced. She kept circling and moving her head up and down like she was scanning me. After the 3rd time of being circled, I was getting a really uneasy feeling, and I eventually said, "Can I help you?" She stopped to the left side of me and grinned. Her look sent shivers down my spine. She kept her head still, while her eyes continued to look me up and down. I never experienced this type of thing before, and it was quite eerie and unsettling. Then she slurred her words and said, "You are hot." She then reached her hand out to touch my arm and said, "Oh my gosh, you're so hot." I uncomfortably backed away and said, "Thank you," then went back to staring straight ahead, like she wasn't there, hoping that she would go away. I then felt her hand touch my left shoulder and then gently run down my arm, which made my skin crawl. I politely asked, "Would you please stop touching me?" She said, "Sorry." Then she leaned in closer and the stench of alcohol was overwhelming. She then slurred, "I'm gonna give you some money and you're gonna buy me something." I said, "Like what?" She said, "In case you didn't know, I'm a little drunk and I need some beer, but they won't sell to me. They say I'm too drunk, so you're gonna get it for me." I then said, if they can't sell it to you, then it would be unlawful for me to get it for you, and I'm not about that. She then put her right hand on the left side of my face, leaned into me, and tried hugging me, with her cheek against mine. With her booze breath hitting my face as she quietly said, "Please, you're so hot, and I will bring you home with me." My hair stood on end, and I got the worst vibes from this girl. I then snapped, "Okay, no, stop touching me. Get away from me." The other customers in line turned and shot me a combined look of shock and pity. The clerk then looked up. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to leave the store. I already told you that I'm not selling to you, and now you're bothering the other customers." Without saying anything, she gave what appeared to be a sigh of sadness and stumbled out the door. I finally got up to the counter and bought a pack of cigarettes, my drink, and then walked out. After exiting the gas station, I took a left to get to my car. As I was walking, I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't think anything of it, since there were other cars parked near mine. I unlocked my car and got in. Just before I closed my door, I heard my passenger door open, which shocked me. I quickly got out while keeping my right leg in the car to see the drunk lady attempting to get in the passenger side of my car. "Excuse me," I snapped. "What are you doing?" She gave me a look of confusion. "Well, you're giving me a ride home." She then finished getting into my car. I knelt down. "No, I'm not. You need to get out of my car." She then expressed how she had no way to get home. Regardless of the extreme uneasy feeling and unnatural behavior, I took pity and asked where she lived. She made it known that it was in one of the housing complexes, which was literally at the end of the block. The pity I felt left me, and I snapped. "It's right over there. You can walk." She calmly said, "No thanks, I'll ride." At this point, I got angry. "Please get out of my car." She then looked at me as though she was shocked and said, "You want me to go?" "Yes, please, get out of my car." With a sad look on her face, she looked down and slowly opened the door and got out. I then finally relaxed and sat back in my car. I closed my eyes and gave a sigh of relief while leaning my head back against the headrest. I then felt the car move again, as though someone was getting in, and I turned and looked to see her getting back in my car and closing the door. At this point, I was beyond horrified and very angry. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Lady, if you don't get out of my car, I will drag you out myself and call the cops. Get out now." She refused to move. I went from partly horrified to just plain angry, and I got out of the car, walked around to the passenger side, and opened the door. She looked up at me and calmly asked, "What?" in a confused tone. "Either get out of my car now, or I will drag you out." She then gave an angry huff and got out. I closed the door and turned around and walked back to my car when she then took a swing at me. Luckily, I have fast reflexes. I backed my head up and caught her wrist. I then physically turned her out of the way and gave her an aggressive shove. Not enough to knock her down, but enough to show her that I meant business. She then starts screaming at this other guy that was walking in the gas station, telling him that he needs to call the police because I hit her in the face. I firmly said, "No, I didn't." And she turned around and screamed, "Yes, you did! Yes, you did, you liar!" I calmly said, "Fine. Then I'm sure all these cameras out here will confirm your story and prove that I'm lying." She then gave a look of defeat, and I got back in my car and immediately locked the doors. After starting the car, I went into my vehicle settings and programmed my key fob to unlock just the driver door instead of all of them. This meant that from now on, I have to push unlock twice on my key fob to unlock all the doors. I wasn't about to let this type of thing happen ever again. I put the car in reverse and my rear parking sensor went crazy. I looked behind me to see her standing there, refusing to move. I called the police and explained everything to them, and they asked me to ask her to move. I informed her that I am on the phone with the police and she needed to move. She huffed and got out of the way. I put the window back up and backed the car up and then put it in drive. As I was starting to roll forward, she hit my window with the side of her fist, then spit on it. I informed the police of that, which they also heard. I guess my car's Bluetooth was pretty good, so they asked me to describe her. They said they would send an officer to the scene. I asked if they needed me to stay, and they suggested I leave, since she was clearly belligerent. I was relieved to get out of there. I was tired, and I had to work the next day. I didn't sleep very well that night. I never experienced that type of thing before, and it was one of the creepiest moments of my life. Ever since then, I have been more cautious and aware of my surroundings. I would hate it if I ever ran into that woman again, sober or not. Last Saturday, I was home alone studying for my pathology exam, med school student, and I was waiting for my brother to come from a night out. He's 17, and he was at his best friend's birthday party. We had a deal that he had to come home by 1 a.m. I was responsible for him because our mom was on a business trip. So, it's around 1:15, and he still is not home. At that same time, I called my best friend who was also going home from a night out to stop by my house so we can smoke a cigarette and talk a little, because I was so tired of studying and needed to relax a little. So he came, we smoked and talked, and then he decided to go home by foot. His house is 20 minutes away from mine. 2 minutes after he left my place, he texted me that some weird stuff is going on. He described that 100 meters from my house is some creepy guy dressed like a priest with a black hood, KKK style, but black. Guy was walking in circles and saying something in gibberish or butchered Latin. No one else was with him. The street was empty. My friend was scared, and he hides behind a tree and calls an Uber. I was so shocked because my friend is a 22-year-old male, professional boxer, and not easy to scare. His Uber came a few minutes after, and he left. I locked all doors in panic. Meanwhile, my brother is still not home. I was calling him, but he is not answering. I knew he had to walk next to the creepy dude to come home. After 45 minutes, he came home, drunk, and went right to sleep. Next morning, I asked him if he saw the creepy guy, and he said no. Later, I realized that the creepy dude was right in front of the house of the family who lost their daughter 10 years ago. Daughter was killed right there by her boyfriend, who, after shooting her, committed suicide. Years ago, the family's car exploded because someone put a bomb under it. Background on my neighborhood: it's a fancier part of the city, really calm, with old villas and mansions. There is an old cemetery a 5-minute walk from it, and also 2 hospitals. There is a rumor going around that cults are having meetings and masses on that cemetery. The whole vibe of the neighborhood is pretty unsettling, considering all the old houses, 2 hospitals. One of them is a children's hospital, so you can hear children cry and scream all the time, and the cemetery. I have only talked to about 3 people about this incident, largely because I feel as if it's my fault somehow. In 2018, I was hanging out with a friend that I wasn't supposed to be with. So, for the sake of secrecy and ease, I told my 17-year-old sister to drop me off at our old elementary school and then have them pick me up from there. Nothing weird happened. We hung out, and then I told them to drop me back off at the elementary school at midnight, the time of their curfew, and my sister would come get me. I was almost 15 at the time, and though we had moved about a 15-minute drive from our old school, it wasn't in a bad area. I used to live in Utah, specifically the Sandy area, in a middle-class neighborhood, though we weren't middle class. It was a quiet neighborhood, full of Mormons, and I never truly had any scarring experiences. It is important to note that despite being nearly 15, I probably look anywhere between 9 and 12, as I was on the shorter side and I truly didn't hit puberty until about 15 and a half. When we pulled up to the school, there was a hatchback white car that was driving around rather recklessly, such as speeding it around in reverse, doing spin-outs, and stuff like that. It was going in circles around this curb that split off the drop-off zone and the small faculty parking lot. I sat with my friend in their car for a second, expressing my concerns about the car, and they assured me that it was just a stupid teenager. I didn't say much more about it and said my goodbyes and got out of the car. The way the school is set up is that there is a large brick building, and when looking head-on at the school, there is a small opening to the left that leads back toward the playgrounds. The faculty parking lot is about 20 to 30 feet from the entrance to the school. When I got out of the car, I sat by the main office doors that would lead into the school right underneath a bright light. I needed to put my shoes on. I don't remember now why I hadn't done it before. The car stopped in the faculty parking lot, not in a parking spot, but in the middle of the central lane. Cautiously, I got up after successfully securing my shoes on my feet, and I stared at the car. As I said earlier, I am easily anxious. A man, hard to describe as he was backlit by a streetlight, got out and started walking toward his now open trunk. I watched as he paused and pulled something out of his trunk. Though I couldn't really see his face, I knew he was staring at me, and he said, "I'm sorry for whatever happens to you. It's not your fault." I didn't say anything in return, and ran towards the back of the school, and I kept running until I hit a large portable, hiding behind it and peering around towards the drop-off area. He must have gotten back in his car as he pulled out of the parking lot. The back area of the school is large, and in the far corner, there is a back exit onto a large steep road that goes down. I tried to call my sister a few times, but after she didn't answer, I called my friend. I made my way toward the back alleyway and exited onto the road. Just then, as I crossed a small side street, the car turned onto the road. He saw me probably immediately as I saw him, and I ran down the road, hanging up on my friend. When I reached the bottom of the hill, there was a house on the corner, and I cut through their grass and stood on their stoop and rang their doorbell. The car stopped at the corner, still on the street with the large hill. He rolled down his window to talk to me. "I'm a police officer. I wanted to know if you need any help," the man said, leaning slightly onto the center console, presumptuously so I could hear him better. I insisted I didn't need help, and I was okay. But the man kept insisting I come to the car. Of course I didn't. After about 30 seconds, he left. The people in the house opened their door, and I was crying. It was a middle-aged man and his wife. They also had a dog, it seemed. I explained the situation about the car that was chasing me, and I got my friend who dropped me off on the phone. My friend is absolutely the worst at directions, and as the wife tried desperately to give it to them, it didn't seem to be going anywhere. The car came back, as the two were sitting on the stairs with me. I started freaking out as it drove slowly by the house. All I could say was, "That's them, that's the car." The man walked down his driveway with the dog, but the car sped away. Eventually, my friend found their way, and the woman walked me up the hill to their car. I couldn't thank them enough. I went home and notified the police, but nothing ever came of it. I don't know what that man's intentions were, but I can clearly tell that they weren't positive. Once upon a time when I was about 15, my mom had unfortunately discovered the internet and the guys in the multitudes of available chat rooms. I have to tell you that she was still married to and living with my dad and I at the time. They had been married almost 20 years back then. After several failed attempts at meeting up with the multiple guys and girls, she finally met this one guy from Oregon. Soon after she started talking to him on the phone, he introduced her to his best friend, a woman who lived near him. My mom had me speak to him on the phone in an effort to sort of introduce us. But when he supposedly put the best friend on the phone, it was obvious to me that it was the guy's voice, trying to sound like a woman. I told my mom, but of course she didn't believe me. She was so convinced that all was well with that she soon made plans for both of them to come down to our small California town so she could meet up with them and have them stay at our house. When I heard that, I started getting really nervous. So I was totally thankful when they didn't show up to meet her. She didn't hear from them for a few days, until the guy finally called her with some dumb excuse. But at that point, I was about done with all that, so I got on the phone and told him that I knew he was pretending to be the woman. You guessed it, he denied it all. Not long after that, my mom actually started mentioning her and I leaving my dad behind to go live up in Oregon with him. She told me she had already talked to the local high school staff up there about getting me enrolled there. The saving grace was when he called a few nights later, pretty late. He told my mom that something terrible had happened to his best friend, the woman. He said that he hadn't been able to reach her for a few days, and he had been worried, so he checked their local paper. He told us that according to the newspaper, she had been found stabbed to death in her home. That was pretty strange to me, considering that I was very positive there was no her. It was always just him. I just knew it. So, a day later, I decided to go online myself, dial-up days, and check their local paper for the article the guy had mentioned. I couldn't find any article of the sort, so I ended up emailing the editor of that paper to inquire about the supposed murder that happened just a little over a week earlier. When she replied back that no such article existed, I explained the whole situation to her via email. She replied to that, asking me for his name so that maybe she could look him up herself. So I gave it to her. It took her a few days to get back to me, but when she did, she told me that he was in fact a dangerous man and not to even think about moving up there to be with him. Apparently, he had been charged with something like attempted manslaughter on his ex-girlfriend. To my great relief, my mom finally listened to me when I showed her the emails between me and the newspaper editor lady. She left the computer room after that and called him to confront him. He tried to deny it, but she didn't fall for it, and she told him that there was no way we would be moving up there to be with him. Since I did the necessary research, we dodged a major freaking bullet. This took place last month on the 24th in a sushi restaurant in Cologne, France. My ex and I decided to go eat dinner at this small sushi place we would often go to. We're on good terms and still see each other from time to time. We sat down near the entrance. I was facing the window. We had just started eating when a group of 4 17-year-olds came in and sat at the table next to ours. They began having a conversation about some weird guy they encountered on their way to the restaurant. Apparently, he had a problem with one of the kids, who I'll call Tom. I don't remember much about what they said, except that the guy claimed he'd be back for Tom. Tom had a motorcycle helmet, which he had put on the table next to him. This is important for later. I didn't think much of it and carried on eating. I don't remember how many people were there, but I'd say there were around 15 people. A few minutes later, I noticed a guy at the window, and I hear the kids saying, "Holy crap, that's him!" The guy was at the window, angrily gesturing Tom to come outside. Since Tom wasn't coming out, the guy opened the door and told him to come outside. Tom provoked him, cussing him out in French. Then the guy let go of the door, pulls out a knife from his pocket, and charges at Tom. As soon as I saw the knife, my heart dropped. As the guy tried to stab Tom, he grabbed his helmet and strikes the guy with it. A fight breaks out in the middle of the restaurant, breaking everything. Our table was flipped, every plate and soy sauce container got smashed on the floor. Everyone started panicking, but no one could leave as it was a very small restaurant and they were fighting in front of the entrance, so everyone backed up in the corners behind their tables. Me and my ex did the same. I kept telling my ex that we were getting out of there, while she kept calling my name in panic, too scared to move. Realizing we couldn't leave, I just shielded her, staring at the fight. Tom and the guy were on the floor, Tom on top, the guy striking him in his back. I seriously thought that I was going to helplessly watch a 17-year-old get stabbed to death before my eyes. I was glued to the scene, fearing the sight of blood. Thinking Tom was getting stabbed repeatedly, I eventually turned around to my ex and put her head to my chest, telling her not to look. 2 dads ended up breaking off Tom and the guy. One was a super muscular no-business dad, and the other was a smaller Papa Bear type dad. The crazy guy was pushed out of the restaurant. He kept saying he was 47 years old, with kids, and that he'd kill Tom. The owner instructed us to pull down the roll-up security gate since we were the closest to the key on the wall that controlled it. All of us were now safe inside the restaurant. It was a complete mess. Food and sauce everywhere. Tables all flipped and pushed to the side. The buff dad who broke off the fight was here with his wife, baby, and 4-year-old daughter, who was bawling her eyes out. I felt so bad for her, having to witness this at such a young age. A couple called the cops, who arrived probably 3 to 5 minutes later since the station was a 2-minute drive away from the restaurant. Cops entered the restaurant and started inspecting, asking questions, and went to see Tom, who got out of the altercation without a single scratch. Turns out the guy's knife was really cheap, and when Tom struck him with his helmet, it knocked the blade off the handle. The dude had kept hitting Tom in the back with the handle, hence why I thought he was stabbing him. Tom did not seem affected by the situation at all. He had this smirk on his face. Felt like another day in the office for him. He looked the delinquent type, but still, I had expected him to be a little more affected by the situation. Either way, I was glad he was okay. Cops took us outside and started getting our statements. Midway through our statements, we all noticed that a good 20 meters away, the cops had arrested the guy and were interrogating him. They eventually took him to the station. Tom and his friends explained the situation and what happened before they entered the restaurant. According to them, the guy was just leaning on a light pole close to where he was arrested, and when they passed by, Tom made eye contact with him. The guy then tried to intimidate Tom by doing that sudden head movement toward him to make him flinch. Don't know what it's called. Tom did not react and just looked at him, which drove the guy nuts, who then said he'd come back for him. I honestly think they were telling the truth. From what we saw, the guy definitely looked the type to want to kill someone just for looking them the wrong way. The second dad who broke off the fight, the Papa Bear one, was a sweetheart through the whole thing. He talked to everyone and comforted the 4-year-old girl, which was really nice to see. I think she'll be fine. She quickly stopped crying and referred to the guy as le voleur, the robber. She's obviously too young to understand, and I hope she'll forget this ever happened. Cops let us go after getting our information. They never called us, so I don't know what happened to the guy. Since the cameras in the restaurant were fake, they'll have to make do with our statements. And since we all had the same version, I hope this maniac is locked up for attempted murder.